to start, you have to bear in mind that Uruguay had a very strong hydropower investment in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that was fine until the demand continued to grow, and we continued to complement that with fuel-powered plants. So the emissions started going up, and in the start of the century, with prices going up of oil and with more and more dependency on oil, we had a couple of years with droughts, so the hydropower went down. And we are very afraid. So the country got together into a multi-party agreement in 2010 to get into renewables. A country that does not have oil, does not have gas, so we have to import hydrocarbons while we wanted to get independent of that. And also to mitigate the reliance on hydropower, because that is good most of the time, but when you have a bad year of droughts, you have a big problem. So the choice was first wind power and also biomass, and then later on solar power. What did the country do? With agreement of all parties in parliament, a process where PPAs for independent power producers were called in tenders, So we gave them 20, 25 years of contract to the best bidder for a certain amount of power. And that we did it in several sequences. And we got, at the first, rather expensive offers, because the technology, as you know, goes down, then better. And that was one of the processes. And they are still working. So now we have 34, 35% of wind power in the network, in the grid. Complementary to that, 2 and then 3 pulp mills from forestry to cellulose mills that are used for the paper industry, developed in Uruguay, and they have a surplus of energy because they are circular economy facilities that all what is waste they burn, and they produce electricity for themselves, but they have a very important surplus. So that's the biomass. The biomass comes mostly from the paper mills and also from sawmills and different kind of industries that burn wood mostly. And so we got 20% of biomass, 35% of wind power, 40% of hydropower, and the rest is solar. And in the average of 4 years, ending in 2019, we have 97% of all the electricity is renewable. The oil, the fossil fuel burning plants are used only when we have a specific situation. And we also have some surplus. So we started in exchanging with Brazil and Argentina energy. And that is also turned into an interesting business. Of course, the surplus is not always on the one side. We have surplus most of the time. Sometimes we need from them, and we do have to turn on the power plants. So it was a very important transformation. That's what we call the first energy transformation of the country, and we are all happy with it. Well, we had some advantages. There was a very big agreement, so that gave certainty to the investors. If you gave a contract for 20 years, Uruguay have a record of complying with all its commitments, so the investors came happily for these PPA contracts. That's number one. Also, there was a very agreement in the country, no social unrest related to this, so it's another confidence creating issue. So that's number one, and that allowed us to go quickly. We also have a lot of renewable resources. We have wind, we have sun, we have oil, we have rain, so it's a country that is especially good for renewables, of course. And also, we don't have hydrocarbons. If we had, probably most of our electricity would have been dependent of hydrocarbons, and it takes a longer time to get away from something you are already exploiting, right? Well, we have launched what is called the second energy transition of the country. This second energy transition aims at reducing what is left of fossil fuels, that is mostly in transportation and industry. It's 40%, 38% of our total energy consumption still comes from fossil fuels, not in electricity, but in the rest. So we will have to expand electricity, electrifying the transportation. That's number one. And number two, there are other uses of energy that are harder to electrify directly, so we need a new energetic element, and that is hydrogen. In this case, green hydrogen as an enabler of deep transformation of more difficult processes. For example, long distance transportation is not easy with battery electric vehicles. So there's a niche for hydrogen, but also a different kind of industries such as cement making or iron derivatives or fertilizers are dependent on fossil fuels. So what we think that is a niche for hydrogen. The problem is, in a country of the size of Uruguay, green hydrogen, the scale of green hydrogen projects is too big. So we have to start thinking about exporting. In that way, we developed a roadmap with McKinsey that sets several points. We are starting with a pilot project to start with a learning curve this year. This is a small domestic project for transportation. But at the same time, we have been working with private companies in alternative fuels that use hydrogen and use other kind of things, such as CO2 captured from the biomass processes to make methanol or to make ammonia from the air with nitrogen. And we are open in a discussion of data room processes with several private companies that want to install these kind of projects in Uruguay. Those are not so small projects, and they have to have a strong demand from some place, an off-taker. For example, a maritime shipping company, or if we are thinking about green jet fuel, an airline or a country or a group of countries such as Europe that are also symmetrically developing their demand to import from other countries. And we are in talks with the German government, for example, to get into what they are planning for fostering the production of hydrogen abroad. And that is the road that we are. And we think in maybe 5 or 10 years, the world will have a more broad infrastructure for hydrogen, but now we have to start moving and aiming at the long term. Well, I've been in conversations with many officials here in the UAE, in ADNOC, in Masdar, in the government. And what I see is that they are keen on advancing and betting on a new renewable industry. And what we think is that we are quite complementary in that side. We have some experience, we need some technology, we need some capital. They are going in the same way. They have maybe their own experience and maybe the possibility of investing in our country. So probably one of these projects we could put forward with one of these UAE companies, and this is a thing that maybe is interesting for them also because it's in a complementary part of the world with a different market to access. I think it's evolving quickly. There is quite a lot of awareness about the need of investing in sustainability, and the financial sector is getting more and more involved. But also, there are special, you always have this egg and chicken problem, because people are not going to invest in a long-term project, in a new energetic product, if you don't have a market. And likewise, people are not going to develop a market if they're not going to get the supply. So this is a chicken-egg problem. And this is a global problem, because in bigger countries, maybe you can think of it as a local problem. The government can say, well, I will put money into developing demand and at the same time developing supply. But for Uruguay, that is not possible because our local demand is very small. So we have to talk internationally about it. That is why the off-taking of a project is very important. If you're getting into a methanol plant using green hydrogen and carbon sequestration, that's a lot of money. You have to recover it in maybe 15 years, maybe more. You need, at the start, an off-taking that makes it sure that this investment would, in a way, work. Maybe 15 years down the road, there's a natural market for this, and it's not a problem, but now you need an off-taking. So some countries are going into assuring the off-taking from some of these projects. This is a case of Germany, for example. And some countries are more thinking about the very big transportation companies, such as shipping or airlines, and aiming their projects at this kind of taking because the sustainability challenge they have is very big, and it can be solved with these new fuels, not with liquid hydrogen, which is still not mature for that. So that's the roadmap we are thinking internationally, thinking about partners so that we can get the off-taking and develop these kind of projects that are naturally serving some global market, not just the Uruguayan market. At the same time, that spills over into our country and helps us solve our own demand of fossil fuels, of course. No, because as I said, the demand for this kind of energetic in Uruguay is small, and so you can solve it with a pilot project or two, maybe a little more, but you have to, in the same time, think about high-scale projects to be competitive, and those need a global market. So we have to ask for partners, and that's what we are doing. That's why we're here. That's why we went to Europe last year. That's when we are in talks with Japan. So you need international partnerships to get this demand-supply thing. On the financial side, I didn't tell you with the previous question, we have the advantage that Uruguay is reliable, so our rates our loan rates are not high, and the country can take debt, or even the private companies in Uruguay can take debt with rather low rates. So that's an advantage, because if you want a long-term recovery of the investment, if you have a low rate, well, that's good. And that is one of the things we think that makes possible for Uruguay to receive regionally oriented projects and not only locally oriented projects. I mostly said it in the first part of your questions. It was very important for the power utility to celebrate power purchase agreements for 20 years for the developers of the wind power to come. So they would get the certainty that they will sell all the electricity they could to the system. And in that way, what we achieved was international companies came with the best technology, mostly at that time Scandinavian, Spanish, countries in Europe that had previous experience in wind power, in a moment where the wind power was starting to get momentum. So it was very, in a way, lucky, or maybe not so lucky, maybe it's a good decision to go into wind power at that time, because it was a moment where there was a technology already quite mature and ramping up in mass consumption, production. So we had very good suppliers, we had the capability to finance it, we had the demand that assured the selling, and that was the key issue. A PPA in a serious country, the technology is already ready, so you can get a developer and say, well, I get the banking of the project, I have the technology, I have the off-taking, and I have the situation solved. That was the wind power. And you have the wind. That's not for all the countries. We have wind. It's interesting to get a bit technical. The best wind power generators at that time were not operating in the average of a wind we had. We are lower than other parts. And they evolved, making bigger I don't know what you call it, propeller size. I don't know if the propeller is a word in English, but you know the wind power. You know, it got bigger because of the lighter materials, and now they're optimum for our wind. So that also was a technical thing that developed at the same time. And that's it. Yes, we have a lot of solar potential. We have some solar on the system, 0.5 gigawatt at the moment. Uruguay is not a very big system. 2 gigawatts is a peak. 4 gigawatts is the whole capacity of the city, of the system. And we have half of gigawatt of solar. We could make that into maybe 200 gigawatts of solar because of the areas that are tier 1 capacity, and the price is going down and down, the cost of solar panels. So no doubt the future is solar for us, mostly. The wind system already can evolve a lot more than we have, and we have a very low population density, so that's not a problem regarding where do you put the plants that, in highly populated countries such as the European ones, well, you have to go into the sea. In Uruguay, you have low cost of the land, and you can use it without altering the rest of the economy. Also, cattle farms and wind power take along well.